is reality? Knowledge, the meaning of life. These are big, in-depth topics you may tackle figuratively, explaining existence as a journey down the road or across an ocean, a thread, a game, a war, a book, a window of opportunity, or an all short-lived a flicker of flame. 2,400 years ago, one of history's most famous thinkers said, "Life is as if one is being chained up in a cave, forced to watch shadows being reflected on a stone wall." Pretty cheery, right? This famous thinker, who everyone at least knows of, is Plato. Plato suggested in the Allegory of the Cave, found in Book 7, The Republic, in which the Greek philosopher envisioned the ideal society of examining concepts such as justice, truth, and beauty. The Allegory of the Cave is a short narrative created by Plato regarding human perception. The foundation of human perception, according to Plato, should not be created through representations alone. Rather, people should be using reasoning and critical thinking in order to create their intellectual foundation. While Plato devoted himself when reading and writing, one of the most famous theories he came up with was this theory of art. Plato had a serious love and hate relationship with art. He loved talking about it, but he hated it. He hated it because he believed that it threatened each individual in society. According to Plato, there are three types of worlds: the ideal world, the real world, and the artistic world. The ideal world is where people do not live in because it is perfect. However, people are able to see glimpses of the ideal world. This ideal world is a source for everything in the real world. The real world is where people actually live. This world consists of objects in people's daily lives, but there is no one specific object that is perfect. For example, the real world consists of tables. There are many different types of tables. There are many different types of objects in the real world because the ideal world only consists the one and perfect object. Lastly, the artistic world is a copy of the real world. And this artistic world is one world that Plato disliked and disagreed with. According to Plato, the artistic world takes people further away from the real world and the ideal world. This is because the artistic world is a copy of the real world. The real world is a copy of the ideal world. Thus, this idea of imitation in the artistic world is a copy of the ideal world, making it an illusion for people. Furthermore, Plato believed artists led people astray by taking advantage of their powers. He believed, according to James Sloan Allen, in the article Plato, The Morality and Immorality of Art, skills give artists the power to represent deceptive fictions of truth and to induce people to act on those deceptions. Plato strongly believed people should strive to be better than what they were presented with. Therefore, imitation was not appreciated. It can be assumed if Plato were still to be alive, he would have strong reactions towards Pablo Picasso's and Norman Rockwell's art. Pablo Picasso exemplifies what it means to truly illustrate what an artwork should do for people, while Norman Rockwell's artwork exemplifies how art can be threatening to people in regards to the Allegory of the Cave. Pablo Picasso was a famous Spanish artist for his abstract artworks. During the early 1900s, his artworks were fairly realistic. However, in the mid-1900s, his work of art transitioned from being realistic to highly unrealistic. He played around with a lot of concept of cubism and abstraction until it became his signature style. Plato would have completely agreed with how Picasso portrayed his artwork. Picasso does not use the power of art in order to imitate an object in real life. Rather, he uses the power of art to create a conceptual idea for people to analyze and interpret. This can be seen throughout his whole entire spectrum of his artworks. One of his paintings, Woman in an Armchair, exemplifies how Picasso produces this artwork solely through abstract ideas. When the audience looks at this, people are searching for the woman and the armchair. However, because of Picasso's use of cubism, it is difficult to spot the two main subjects. People now have to go above and beyond to figure out what they interpret the woman and the armchair to be for themselves. There is no imitation of a woman in an armchair from the real world. There is no minor details of how a woman or an armchair even looks like. Rather, he conceptually drew a woman sitting on an armchair. This then allows people to participate in his artworks through interpretation, analysis, and critical thinking. Furthermore, Plato would argue Picasso demonstrated the concept of the allegory of the cave very well. It can be assumed Plato would perceive art museums and galleries as a cave where people go in, feel safe, feel comfortable, feel complacent enough that they are intimately interacting with these artworks. There are many artworks that represent and imitate the real world, thus only allowing people to perceive what is shown and not going in depth with it. However, unlike many artworks representing realism, Picasso's artworks, which he mostly deals with abstract concepts, do not keep people grounded in comfort. When people see Picasso's artworks, there is so much room for interpretation and critical thinking that they will not be just satisfied with imbuing what Picasso has given them. Therefore, when they go back to the real world, or in other words, when they leave the cave, they do not leave with the representation. Rather, they leave with a different perspective that is uncomfortable, which will further enhance them in the real world. The abstract concept will help people feel uncomfortable, evoking feeling of wanting or needing to change. This idea of change is significant because people are now able to create their own sense of what their ideal world looks like, which then leads to being able to strive in the real world. Another famous artist during Picasso's time was Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell was an American artist who mainly painted and created illustrations for books. Unlike Picasso, Rockwell's artworks dealt a lot with the concept of realism. Rockwell was highly detail-oriented in his drawings, illustrating every line of what he saw. Plato would argue Rockwell is doing exactly what Plato fears and abhors, representing the real world through the use of imitation. Plato would even go further, stating Rockwell is taking advantage of the use of his skills. Rockwell is utilizing his sense of power in the wrong way, leading people to the wrong direction. The use of realism in Rockwell's artworks does not appeal Plato because all it does is it encourages people to be complacent with where they are at, and since there is no room for interpretation and analysis. Rather, the audience feeds off from Rockwell's artworks, taking in only what they see. Rockwell's artworks are so realistic to the point people do not need or see the need to interpret it even further. One of Rockwell's famous paintings, Voyeur, exemplifies this very well. In the painting, there's clearly a girl who is watching two people sleeping at the back of the bus. The audience is clearly able to depict the subject, which is a young girl who is watching two people. It is clear for the audience to depict the scenery because the colors, the shapes, the composition, the angles, etc. are all what people are used to. Unlike Picasso's artworks, people are drawn very realistically and objects are colored very realistically to look like objects. The audience is very familiar with the whole artwork itself. They do not feel the need to go further in depth with this artwork. Furthermore, Rockwell's artworks allow people to be complacent even when they step out of the cave Plato refers to. It can be assumed when people are exposed to Rockwell's artworks, they feel comfortable. They feel comfortable because they're being presented with what they already know. They probably know some people who look very similar to this young girl. They probably know a very similar environment that they've seen in this picture. Because of this familiarity, the audience does not value the importance of perceiving the world in a different way. Therefore, even when the audience goes outside the cave, people are not able to strive for the better because they are constantly in this level of satisfaction. As we go about our lives, can we be confident in what we think we know? One day, a glimmer of light may punch a hole in the most basic assumptions. Will you break free to struggle towards the light, or stick with the comfortable and familiar illusions?
Obviously, Sunny, your topic was not media theory, which is what's on the chart. And yet, My question is, how do you think Plato would respond to photography and film that is a representation, an artistic representation of life, and maybe only a portion of what is reality?
Plato mostly dealt with art itself. I think during this time he probably didn't think about anything about photography or movies.
Because it didn't exist yet.
Right. However, there is this person, I didn't research him in depthly, but there is this person who took Plato's Allegory of the Cave and put it into like the movie aspect and the photography aspect. And what he said was that like the theater is the cave that people are in, and then they intimately interact with the motions that they see in front of their faces. And so like when people leave the cave, it's up to them to want to like be affected by that or just leave it in the cave and just walk out. So there isn't anything specific Plato said, but there is some like other things that people took out from and then put it into photography and film as well. Yes?
Yeah, from your work, did you get any sense of how Plato, as brilliant as he was, could sort of fall into the trap of not seeing that for many people art does point back upward? His sense is sort of that everything is imitation of imitation, that's always bad, always degrading, always gets worse. How could he not see that art could in fact make people think, help them think better, point them toward the higher realities?
I did a little bit of research about the history of Plato. He was highly discouraged by what happened to Aristotle and the whole governmental issue. So he went into like his own hiding and did a lot of research and a lot of reading and a lot of writing. And I think that completely turned him off of like any abstract ideas. And so he was highly focused on like the analytical, the logical, and like that kind of stuff. So it wasn't in my research, but if I were Plato, I probably would disagree with that. But I mean, not that I would disagree with you, I'm just saying if I were.
Yeah, no, that's fine. By the way, you said Aristotle, I think you meant Socrates.
Oh, yes, sorry, thank you.
So I'm thinking about the statues and the sculptures of the gods at that time in Greece. And if we're consistent with what you're saying about Plato, then he didn't think there should be statues because they would be more realistic.
Correct.
Interesting. Do you agree with it?
To a certain point, I would.
Why?
I do. I think he's a little bit extreme. Again, he went into a place by himself, thought about this theory, and he didn't consult with anyone else, which is why it's very extreme. But I do think it's applicable to a certain point. I went to the Chicago Art Institute, and I went to the modern art section, and I was just strolling around, and my friend was so mad that there was a white canvas with nothing. And then I was like thinking about what Plato would say with this, and I was like, you know what? There's so much interpretation with this. Like you can just read the title and make up your own story, blah blah blah. But it didn't work for every single artwork, and so I think it goes to a certain extent. Because there was at one point when I went to the modern art, there was just a stack of Dollar Tree candies on the corner, and like, what is that? It's clearly a candy from the real world. So how would, there was just a lot of things to think about. That was interesting.
Good. Thank you, Sonny.
Mm-hmm.